Let's do this. Welcome to take 3 of episode 105, I think. Yeah, 105. Our Prime Directive episode discussions. It's been a tough go trying to get this stream, this podcast to go because we've had internet issues the past 2 times we tried to do this. So we're gonna try now. Everything looks good so far. I got an Ethernet cable just to kind of update you guys on the back end. If this doesn't work, we're probably gonna have to do something, maybe a different time or pre-record. So hopefully this works. Bill, how are you doing this morning?
Doing well. Happy to be here. Hoping we steer clear of those ion storms this week.
Yes.
That's we're definitely hoping to get through this and be kind of back to normal. But yeah, we've been talking about this episode for a while. We kind of dive into Prime Directive kinds of conversations fairly often in less defined ways when certain episodes come up in conversation, either through our rewatches or we talked about the Prime Directive a good bit, I think, for New Eden when that aired on Discovery season 2. So we thought it would be cool to not do it in any kind of like ranked favorite Prime Directive episodes kind of thing, but just have a conversation about episodes that kind of come to mind when we think of the episodes that feature Prime Directive kinds of debates and dilemmas and quandaries, all those kinds of things. So really excited to dive into it, and just I'm curious to see which episodes come to mind for you. Like, what are the strongest impressions on you from this like genre of Star Trek episode, I guess.
Yeah. A great transition before we get into the main topic. This will be like a 30 to 40 minute episode. We don't want to push the stream too much right away. I just want to test it, make sure we're good to go so we can get back to that hour mark that we usually do. Why we wanted to kind of touch on this topic right now is because in my rewatch I hit on A Taste of Armageddon, and Bill asked me what episode came to mind. That's one of those episodes, A Taste of Armageddon, that came to mind in TOS. So rewatch, before we jump into the main topic, my rewatch, I did watch an episode. I watched let's see here, Devil in the Dark. Yes.
Great.
It's just a classic. I love it.
One of the best.
What more can I say that I haven't already said about it? I love it. I love it when
quintessential Star Trek.
Yeah, so it's great.
Cool.
Yes. Bill, how about you?
For me, I'm on. I have 2 episodes left for season 2 of TNG. I watched The Emissary, the Kalar episode, Worf's long lost, I guess, love. Episode. Yeah. Really cool. I've always really liked it too. I love the ending. I love the solution to the problem.
Yeah.
I love Worf's chemistry with Kalar, Michael Dorn, and Susie Plaxton. I think they're really good together. Interesting take on the Klingons. First look at half Klingon, half human. What ultimately ends up becoming B'Elanna Torres. Kalar certainly, I think, battles a lot of the same demons that B'Elanna Torres fights. So a lot of interesting stuff there, a lot of cool things to think about, and I think it's a really good episode. And the reaction on Twitter, just the few comments I got back in reviewing the episode, seems to echo that sentiment. I feel like it's a pretty popular early TNG episode. So
yes.
Cool.
Great.
So looking forward to finishing season 2 and getting into TNG proper.
Yeah.
I guess you would say
season 3 and beyond.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
We have Rob in the chat. Welcome, Rob.
Welcome, Rob.
Let us know if you can. What was the last episode you watched? And Rob says he saw Susie Plaxton at Destination Star Trek, which is really cool.
Cool.
She's
freaking awesome.
That's really awesome. Yep. Cool. So should we just dive right into the main topic?
Yeah.
Rob, since you're here, feel free to steer the conversation your own way. Let us know what you think as we kind of talk, and drop any thoughts you have on like Prime Directive episodes. What comes to mind for you?
Yeah.
What do you think about this? So you kind of said that A Taste of Armageddon is kind of what
Yeah, well,
got you
while I was
to me.
watching the episode, I was like, this probably shouldn't have been handled this way, maybe. General Order 1, or the Prime Directive, as it is known now, probably might have prevented Kirk being able to do that, because I feel like he just kind of jaunted into the situation and didn't really give a second thought to what implications it may cause to these two civilizations. So even though I know it's tough, I mean, we're gonna dive into examples of where it's a tough situation, but yeah, that's kind of what kind of stemmed this conversation that I wanted to do on stream, because we've had it before. So
I think A Taste of Armageddon is a really good example of how one of the things I think I've kind of noticed in watching, and a lot of it's headcanon stuff. Yeah. Clearly, the reason that the Prime Directive is handled a certain way in TOS is because it's a new thing, and they're developing it, and there's production reasons for why, it doesn't line up necessarily really well. But in my head, the 23rd century, the Prime Directive isn't different, but is maybe handled slightly more loosely and casually, and and to me it makes kind of sense. In the 23rd century, Kirk is kind of out there alone. He's in deep space. There's not a huge fleet at his disposal. The bureaucracy of the Federation and Starfleet isn't like right at his beck and call to come clean up a mess, and to come like oversee a transition kind of a situation with trying to handle things. It just, I think he has to play a little bit more fast and loose with what's going on. And I think even in Discovery, that's kind of how I reason how Pike is sort of able to get away with what he does in New Eden, where in the 24th century, those captains have a slightly different read on the Prime Directive because of how the bureaucracy of the Federation and Starfleet has kind of grown, and it's made it more possible to maybe have more oversight over these things and have more of a plan for how to deal with these kinds of situations.
But wasn't there an ambassador on board?
There was.
So I go back and forth. I see, I want to, give the benefit of the doubt to maybe Kirk, because he, like you said, he is in deep space. But at the same time, there's a representative that should know the rules.
There is.
That's their job. But I mean, yeah, whatever.
Well, TOS definitely struggles with, and it's part of the personality of the show, as far as I'm concerned. I'm saying it struggles with, but it's a trait of TOS to have an ambassador or some sort of bureaucrat on the ship who is kind of a putz, kind of clueless, kind of not operating with a full deck. And the Taste of Armageddon is certainly an example of that, like a single-minded, one-track ambassador who has like one reason to be there and isn't really capable of, operating on the same level as Kirk and Spock and crew. Yeah. And it's one example of that. But you're right, there is an ambassador there who, in theory, if you look at Star Trek as this whole, they're out there trying to deal with this other society who has this issue. You would think you would defer to, a diplomat who is trained and, instead of Kirk going in guns blazing and deciding he's going to change, the entire cultural and society backbone of this, not one planet, but two. Dynamic.
Yeah. Which, I mean, there is, which I get why Kirk does this. There is countless episodes, and this is one of them where it's a tough decision that you would want to, break that the Prime Directive and help these two warring civilizations, not just So, I like.
Well, I guess. Do you think, having kind of recently watched it, do you think Kirk makes the same decision if the Enterprise isn't like pulled into it directly? If the Enterprise isn't a casualty in this war, and it's not like you guys are all going to die if you choose to cooperate? Do they? I mean, my take on it has always been that kind of like that's obviously the game changer. Where Kirk's like, well, yeah, I'm obviously not going to do that. So my only kind of way out of this is to sort of blow up the whole, expose the wrong path that they're on, and try to change it that way.
I think, isn't there an episode or something that's like they would they would give their life. They would
Well,
give
sure. Yeah.
their life to
Sure.
not break the Prime Directive.
Sure.
But hey, this
Well,
yeah, I mean, I
Picard
get
certainly said
yeah. Um,
that's a Picard
no, I think
position.
once the Enterprise is pulled in, it's all over. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's just the Enterprise and her crew are on another level, and that they're above all the laws with Kirk. So yeah, I get that's a great point. That kind of once the Enterprise gets pulled
I
in.
mean, I think Kirk is outraged and sort of alarmed by what these two planets are doing, and I think all of his opinions that kind of come out over the course of the episode, once the ship is threatened and he's threatened and his crew is threatened. I think all that's true, and I'm sure all of that would have been true no matter what. But I do think the stakes are sort of obviously raised, and his willingness to kind of go along with it are ended by, oh, by the way, your ship has been hit by a virtual missile, and that means all you guys got to come down here and report to
Is
these
that just a plot point to
chambers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of transitioning, Bill. What kind of episode or episodes or movies came to mind when we started kind of sitting down to kind of maybe talk about what kind of things came to mind when thinking about the Prime Directive?
Rob mentions Star Trek Insurrection in the chat, and that's certainly one really quickly to mind for me because it's a movie, and it's a big it's a huge plot point in that movie.
Yeah.
And sort of similar to A Taste of Armageddon, Picard. That's one of the times that Picard sort of bucks maybe the status quo or the position of the whole of the Federation Starfleet. So Insurrection certainly one. Who Watches the Watchers is another one. A lot of the Picard episodes where he sort of is put in a position to interpret the Prime Directive or find a way to compromise, stay true to it, but figure out a way out of a problem. There's quite a few of them. Pen Pals is one that I watched. Like you, we kind of both hit a big Prime Directive episode in the last couple of weeks, which is certainly part of why we're here, I think, talking about this. Pen Pals, there's a scene in Pen Pals, which is an early TNG episode where they come across Data makes contact with a girl on a planet that's having a geological disaster. And and it's pre-warp, and Prime Directive would say, stay out of it. You're not really in a position to make yourselves known and do anything about it, at least directly. And there's a scene in it that I always think about with the Prime Directive, with the crew in Picard's quarters sitting around and kind of talking about the problem and talking about the Prime Directive and how each person sort of interprets it. And the writing in that scene, I think, isn't always on point. I think some of the lines are a little heavy-handed, and some of the characters are maybe a little bit out of character with the way they see it. But I appreciate the effort to let us in on that kind of debate and discussion and have the characters unpack a problem and have different points of view on when it should apply, or is it a good idea to follow it. So Pen Pals is a huge one for me because of that scene. Like I said, it's sort of a mixed bag for me, that scene in particular, but it is sort of like if you wanted to sit somebody down who has never seen Star Trek before and say, what is the Prime Directive, and show them what's this all about, this big chair leg of what Star Trek is. I think that scene would at least fill in some gaps and explain to somebody new, like, this is what the Prime Directive basically sort of is. So that's always been a big one for me.
Rob is mentioning False Prophets from Voyager, where the two Ferengi make themselves into gods.
And the way Voyager has to the best thing about the Prime Directive to me is that because to me False Prophets isn't a great episode. I'm not a huge fan of that episode as a whole, but what even when the episodes are kind of weak, the problems that are put forth by the Prime Directive, when to get involved and when not to, are always kind of interesting. They're always difficult situations. I think the writers do a good job across all shows with creating these really challenging moral and ethical dilemmas and making the characters figure out a way to either abide by it or not, and have that process be interesting.
Yeah.
That's become sort of a staple of Trek over the course of the 6 shows now, and each of the shows has examples of how each captain or how each crew you kind of views it and deals with those problems. Even Enterprise, which is before the Prime Directive and before the Federation, Archer occasionally with Dear Doctor and
The Communicator.
the Communicator is another one, yeah, where they're put in these civilization where they sort of go through the process, I think, of figuring out that there needs to be something in place to be a guideline for when to get involved and when not to.
Yeah.
So even the show that doesn't really have the Prime Directive, I think, finds an interesting way to confront those kinds of issues and handle them in new and interesting ways.
Yeah. Rob, I'm surprised you didn't mention Blink of an Eye or even Caretaker.
Right.
As far as a Voyager kind of episode where it deals with Prime Directive-esque moral dilemmas, which is kind of, I think, comes hand in hand with when you're talking about just did they break or didn't they break the Prime Directive. There's always kind of a morality element to it that I think, like you said, kind of makes the episode interesting, even though if it's maybe an episode like False Prophets or something. But
the conversations I remember talking about when we did New Eden, our conversation about that, we both kind of had a different take on did Pike break the Prime Directive or not? Like, was what he did ultimately a good decision or not? I just remember thinking, like, because the fact that we didn't agree and we could have that conversation and have that like really meaty conversation to chew on was really refreshing, and like, wow, yeah, this is Star Trek, because this has been done so many times before, and this is a different spin on that same old idea that is present throughout the franchise. And I think New Eden is another example of a captain, a crew, kind of being in this sort of middle ground. Is it violating the Prime Directive or not?
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, like Blink of an Eye and Caretaker, I think both sort of
dance around that idea.
You can kind of have a debate about how much did they. I mean, certainly in Blink of an Eye, they make a huge impact on that society, all the way through it. I mean, their presence is.
But Caretaker, more so, I think, is that kind of.
You could debate.
Did they or didn't they?
No matter what she did, and that's part of it. I think the reason Caretaker is so great is Janeway, like many of the times I think in Voyager, no matter what she does, she's making an impact on this. No matter what she was going to do, there was going to be a fallout from her decision.
Yeah.
So I think
scenario.
It's a no-win scenario for sure.
Yeah.
No matter what she did, there was going to be a huge fallout, and there was going to be issues left behind by her, regardless. So she's put in a position to, I think, calculate what's the lesser of two evils here. What's the way to go to have the fallout be as digestible as possible for as many people as possible.
Which I think she ultimately does make the right decision, but it's a tough one, right?
It is a tough one. I think it is. I mean, and she sacrifices her crew, really.
Yeah.
Not in a mortal kind of way. They don't die, but there are consequences that affect the people that are under her command and people that aren't even really under her command at that point, the Maquis crew.
Yeah.
She makes a big decision that impacts a lot of people.
But
I think she's making the choice that, in her opinion, has the least consequences for the least amount of people.
Even she makes that even though let's see if I can kind of make this kind of connect. Even though that this civilization has already been manipulated to the point where it might be breaking the Prime Directive, right? The Ocampa are being saved by this entity, but
sure.
It's kind of like New Eden, right? This civilization in the episode of New Eden has already been.
Yeah, they've already been effed with. Like they're human, and they've been lifted and moved, which in itself is like the the thing.
Yeah.
It's already kind of the well's been poisoned at that point.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that's a common theme with these episodes too. Is I think like trying to determine like does the Prime Directive even really apply? Like I feel like I hear that line in
once it's been broken, does it even apply anymore?
Right. Yeah.
That's I think that's what we talked about when we talked about New Eden.
Yeah, and not by you, by if another alien society has already come into the picture, whether it's the Klingons in a private little war, and they come in and they arm one side of a conflict because it's beneficial to them, and Kirk has to choose to arm the other side to make it status quo, knowing that it's going to be a bad move in the long run for these people on this planet, whether it's the Klingons or the caretaker and the Kazon or whatever. Like when another alien species has already kind of come in and put their footprint down, does that kind of give the Federation or Janeway or Kirk or whoever, the carte blanche, go in and do whatever you're going to do to make it as good as possible? Or do you still stay away because who are you to go in and start, manipulating how the society is going to exist from now on? Those kinds of questions are challenging, and not every situation is the same. I think it comes down to the captain's sort of judgment, I think, a lot of the time, and they have to assess what they know about the situation and make a gut call. And I think one of the things, like I was saying, is I think it's easier for me to buy from Discovery and TOS's perspective. Like the captains are a little bit, and even Janeway, really, these captains are like out on the fringes and they don't have help like right at their, in their back pocket all the time. Where like Picard is he's the captain of the flagship. He can make a phone call and the fleet's right there, or the diplomatic envoy's there. Like he's got, I think, less leeway to compromise and operate on the fringes of the Prime Directive. Where Captain like Kirk or Janeway, they're in more lose-lose situations because they don't have the means to, to get help and to get guidance and to get other people to come in and help enforce the Prime Directive or to help pick up the pieces from whatever kind of compromise they have to make. Rob mentions Dear Doctor from Enterprise and In the Pale Moonlight from Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine is certainly a show, like everybody always talks about, is a show that certainly operates on the fringes of, what's right, what's wrong. Cisco makes some gray area decisions, and In the Pale Moonlight is definitely the prime example of that. I think Deep Space Nine does a great job of putting our characters and putting the show in an unusually dark situation with war and real threat from a real tangible jeopardy, I guess, from the Dominion that puts these characters on their heels a little bit and have to make some gray area decisions. And I think In the Pale Moonlight is certainly.
I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I see Cisco being able to make those gray area decisions. But when I go back to Pike, he to me is more of a rule follower and
yes,
maybe makes maybe a different decision than maybe Cisco would. But that's definitely a dark situation, like you said. So,
and I think it's you can certainly. I've always kind of felt that the In the Pale Moonlight example is different than a lot of these other things. Like a lot of these situations that we're talking about, like Your Doctor, like which we haven't really talked about yet, but Rob mentioned as an example, Insurrection. What are some of the other ones that we've talked about? Taste of Armageddon, Pen Pals. We're talking about even Caretaker.
Blink of an Eye, Caretaker. Yeah.
Species that aren't super technologically advanced, that are behind where we are at the time. And are not in a position to kind of choose their own fate and choose their own direction as a society in the bigger picture of the galaxy.
Right.
Where
Romulans have warp capability.
Sure.
I get where you're going with this. Yeah.
Effing with the Romulans is certainly, and what he does with the Romulans certainly carries some moral ambiguity.
Yes.
It's certainly it's a problematic decision that he makes. That I think he has to make, and I think he does what he needs to do. But I don't know. In my head, I don't think of it so much as a Prime Directive problem. You could categorize it as Prime Directive because it's ultimately it's non-interference, and But I feel like I think of it most primarily as dealing with less evolved, less advanced
Yes.
societies than we are. They're the ones that you can easily manipulate, and if you set the precedent and you make it easy to beam down to any planet or start meddling in these planets' societies, you can really do some damage. Where the Romulans, we've been having issues with the Romulans for hundreds of years now, and then we've had wars with the Romulans, and
I don't want to just.
Well, it's certainly a gray area, and it's not a good,
No.
it's not a morally easy choice, and there's a lot of problematic implications for what Cisco does. I think of it as a slightly different.
To me, that's in the Pale Moonlight. To me, Cisco's breaking like a subsection or a sub rule, as where. But if you could look at something else, it's kind of like the main thing, the main prime directive. But then there's subsections where there's smaller things that can be broken.
Sure.
So.
Or even in the Pale Moonlight, Cisco's really is violating an even more like. It's not even like maybe a written rule. It's just a more broad, like you're manipulating another society into a conflict, and you're lying to get them into it. Like it's not even. Sure, I think you're right. I think there probably would be like some sort of subset to the Prime Directive that would say, we're really talking about pre-warp civilizations.
Pre-warp.
But,
that's where
these other societies, you don't want to meddle too much in them either.
And I don't know. It's tough because I feel like there's less of an impact with what Cisco did, but then I think no, that's war. But I don't know. That's a tough, great talking point, Rob. But it's tough.
It is. Rob's asking us to rank the captains as to how well they follow and uphold the Prime Directive. It's tough to do because some of them don't have the same sample size.
Yeah.
Rob's saying Pike, Georgiou, Archer, Picard are at the top, being the ones that most consistently uphold the Prime Directive, with Cisco, Kirk, and Janeway at the bottom being the ones that most often cross the line with the Prime Directive, in his opinion, of course.
There's so many stipulations, like you said, sample size, but also situational stuff. I don't want to give people just a pass or write them off for that, but that has to be taken into account because we've talked about it. Bill said it a couple times during stream. This Picard and these other captains, well, Archer not so much, but they have Starfleet at the ready. Just dial 411 and you can get the Federation. But these other captains, these Cisco's, they're dealing with Cisco, Kirk, Janeway, or edge of Federation space, deep space, where it's tough to make a decision. So I love this because it makes for such a great conversation. So yeah,
it's true. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. I would certainly put Picard at the top just because I think he's like I said, but I think that's all situational. I think that's because of the role he's playing as the captain of the flagship. I think he has to
follow the rules,
to sort of follow the rules and set the example. And but I think he has more tools at his disposal than maybe some of these other captains have had. I do think Kirk and Janeway are sort of both unique in the sense that, like, we've talked about this before. I feel like Kirk and Janeway are the ones that I think could most easily sort of interchange their roles because they're both captains who I feel like are spending a lot of their time like way out in the fringes. Kirk certainly not like insurmountably out there, not like can't turn back, can't go home kind of situation. But TOS I think really portrays we are deep into space. Help is not always one hail away.
Yeah.
They're really spread out. These Constitution class ships, they're exploring the fringes of Federation space and pushing beyond, exploring strange new worlds. And and Janeway obviously is where she is. So those two captains I would sort of put in another category as the two that maybe have the help on the way, most kind of on their own, having to make the most quick trigger, high stakes decisions that are easy to poke holes in. Some I think more rightfully than others. I think they both made decisions that I think are easily sort of picked apart. And then Archer, I think, is certainly in his own category. I think is in Dear Doctor, which you also mentioned, Rob. I think he's kind of fishing without a net. He just doesn't know. He's making the mistakes for other people to learn from. He's certainly a complicated guy too.
Yeah.
The people who are offering him advice on these kinds of things, who are most equipped to offer him advice on these kinds of situations, are Vulcans who he has issues with and trust issues with, and doesn't want to ask for help from.
Yeah.
So he's sort of isolating himself even more than maybe he should be. He's a flawed guy. He's got issues, which I think makes his character more interesting and makes me like the show. But it's a quick way for me to say it's, as much as I love to rank, and I love to rank.
Yes.
This is a topic where I think I'm more comfortable, like, sort of putting them in categories.
Yeah.
And not necessarily like stacking them. Yeah.
So
any other ones kind of come to mind for you? Go ahead.
I mean, so he does. You agree that he does break the Prime Directive?
Who did?
Archer. But there was no Prime Directive to break.
There was no Prime Directive to break. I think the choice he made I think what he wanted to do in Dear Doctor to help would have broken the Prime Directive, I guess.
Yeah.
This is similar. I think these aliens that are suffering from this,
I don't know.
Not really a disease, as Flock says it, more of a biology correcting itself, I guess.
Nature. I don't know how to. Yeah.
Nature. Yeah.
I don't know how to put it.
It's a genetic problem.
Yeah.
That the species has had contact with other capable species. They are not warp capable themselves, but they've already kind of been out there looking for help. The Federation aren't the first people that they've tried to hit up for some medical assistance. Yeah. Starfleet, not Federation. So I suspect that just about any captain would have probably figured out a way to help them somehow. And the challenging part of Dear Doctor is the episode sort of ends with them not really making that decision. They let it go at Phlox's request, which is what makes the episode so problematic for so many people. I remember having Danielle on for a medical ethics episode, and she has a very difficult time with Dear Doctor for that reason. She can't square under any circumstance letting that go and not finding a way to help somehow. I have a hard time believing Picard would. Here's the thing. I think what Picard has kind of shown through episodes like Pen Pals, once the door gets opened and he's inserted into the situation, I think it's hard for him to pull back. And I think that probably is the trick with a lot of these captains. It's easy to make decisions to stay uninvolved.
The New Eden
when
effect, as it were.
Once there's a face and a personality that you get to know, and you're now emotionally and personally invested in people, it's hard to make decisions like, we don't want to be involved, and we're just gonna stick it out and be far away. Yeah. So I kind of do think that other captains would have made the same choice that Archer tried to make in Dear Doctor. I don't think they would have followed Phlox's lead. Yeah. But Archer is operating without a rule book and doesn't really know what to do. And
I just thinking of a kind of a topic that maybe we could do a follow up to this episode. Maybe just kind of wrapping up with, because we're at the 37-minute mark. I don't want to push it. It has been relatively clean so far, but I do, and I think we may have touched on it, but I think it would be fun to kind of take a situation or take a really microscopic kind of look at how other captains would handle big Prime Directive, decisions, which we kind of did in kind of the captains where we kind of switched their
roles.
But I think it would be fun to do more of a microscopic look at just one event. So
yeah, I would love to do that.
Maybe do that. We can think about that later on for another episode. But I think we should just finish up with New Eden, and maybe just give like a quick 1 to 2 minute spiel of why.
We both feel the
of your thoughts. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think he could go either way, which is why I love it so much. But I think Pike makes the decision he ultimately ends up making because they're human they were transplanted. Um, it's not an alien species. It's not, they've already, I think in his mind, it's already sort of been, the well's already been poisoned. They're not a pre-warp civilization that, like, at what point, I guess you'd have to pinpoint, like, at what point do they become an independent
civilization,
like, pre-warp civilization?
Because I know this is a tough
anymore, or not.
It's a tough thing because they are human,
mm-hmm.
which humans at that time are warp capable, so they can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's essentially a colony that just lost track of its history. I mean,
yeah,
they don't really know how they got there, what happened, but they're human.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is kind of similar to, what's the last episode of season 1 of TNG?
The Neutral Zone, with those 20th century humans that they wake up.
Which is kind of, I think, a little bit, I don't know if you guys can see the similarity, but it's similar because they come up to the ship and they, everything, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are other examples of humans out of time coming into contact with our characters and them having to sort of re-educate them and bring them along. And Pike doesn't even do that. Pike doesn't, pick them up and beam them onto the Discovery and take them to Earth. He told one guy, what the one guy kind of already knew to be true, I think. I think it was a compromise. I think it was Pike doing what that guy needed, and but without completely uprooting a society that has kind of put down some roots. And it was a less problematic solution than something else that they could have done. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm kind of on the other side of the coin. I would have rather them just kind of stay out of it, but I see both sides of it too, and to me, as Pike's character, I feel like he follows General Order 1 a little bit closer than he does, but maybe that's early Pike. We haven't seen early Pike. We've only seen.
Well, it's the point that I definitely would kind of agree with is, like, there's that scene later in the season where the Admiral Cornwell says to Pike, like, one of the reasons we left you out in deep space is we wanted you to be the beacon that survives the war because you are the perfect example of a Starfleet captain kind of deal.
Yeah.
So I mean, you could certainly make the case that he might be the guy who would, no matter what, follow the Prime Directive.
Yeah, exactly. He's the beacon.
But
the beacon went a little bit dimmer with that, but I still love that. Rob's quoting that it's similar to the 37s in Voyager. Yeah, I think it's
another example.
It's definitely been done in Star Trek before, but
yes,
yeah. So,
true.
I think we should wrap it up. We could definitely have a part 2 to this for sure.
Yeah, we could definitely.
Real quick, Bill, do you have any Star Trek content that you want to mention?
Mission Log is sort of my original Star Trek podcast, and one of the hosts of that show is leaving. It's John Champion and Ken Ray. They've been doing it since 2012. Ken Ray is leaving the show at the end of the year, and they're going to bring in a new host. They had a supplemental episode where they announced all that. I would just use this opportunity, I guess, to highlight that show and say, I love Mission Log. They've done all of TOS, all the TOS movies. They did the animated series. They've done all of TNG. And by the end of the year, they'll be done the first 3 seasons of Deep Space Nine. They do 1 episode a week and really dive into it. Look for morals, messages, and meetings. What's the episode about? What's it trying to say? Does it hold up? Is the message good or not? Love it, love it, love it. Along with, like, the Ready Room from Trek FM, it's sort of my ground zero of Star Trek podcasts. And,
the Godfather.
they're undergoing some changes, but there's a huge backlog, and they're continuing on. So I think I'd shine a light on that.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I have a Trek Yards episode to kind of highlight on the Annex era Earth space dock thing, space station. It's I love to see the what ifs of, TOS. What would have happened? What ifs of it, the Enterprise would have kept going. There's just great, visual kind of a what if, but it's also like a concept. That's what I'm trying to find. A concept that I find very fascinating, and you could definitely see you can see the lineage from what we have now for Earth Space Dock to what was before. So definitely go check that out. Trek they post some pretty cool content. So yeah, we should be back next week with some more Star Trek content. To be determined as what date, if it's Saturday or Sunday, and what the topic will be. But stay tuned. You guys know the drill. The discussion doesn't have to stop here. Facebook, Twitter, the Discord channel. Great sources to keep the discussion going. So, yeah.
Yep.